We're middle of chapter Reish Tzaddik Gimel, 293. So I'm going to go it over again from the beginning. And to sum up where we're at, after the long discussion about Primis HaKelim and Chetenis HaKelim, and what we're talking about here is this whole section which began all the way in chapter 279. It's page 565. The difference between Eir and Yesh, Eir and Keli. That Eir is Ayin. That energy is fundamentally a substanceless entity, and its union is mainly bittul, which is subjugation to its source. It's just a channel for its source. And container is identity. It expresses a personality that has a unique feature. So it's really its definition is by Yesh about what its identity is. This identity doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad identity or it's a selfish identity, but it is an identity. Whereas Eir, its identity is simply only the flow that it's coming from, where its source. So in explaining that interface, how Eir and Keli meet, so the focus was that the Keli meets with the Primis HaKeli. So in the container itself, there's the three levels: the inner, the middle, and the outer. And it's the inner container that meets the energy. And explaining that, there was a whole discussion of Tsamenu, Kidmusenu, human beings created in the image and the shape of divine, shape and image. So Tselem and Dmus, Tselem is higher and Dmus is lower, like he spoke about the image and the image of the image, like with a seal. And there's the image that the seal makes in the wax. That was in the previous discourse. So the last chapter in 292, the discussion was how that manifests in Avodah, in our efforts, in our work, and the difference between Yechudi Law and Yechudi Tatah. So briefly, Tsamenu is Yechudi Law, which is the perspective from above, that nothing exists. That the only reality is the divine. And existence as we know it is null compared to it, is Ayin. This is the highest level of bittul, where existence is meaningless, in a sense, compared to its source. And Yechud Tatah is our perspective from below, that there's an existence, but you come to realize that this existence is dependent upon and on its source, on the Ayin. So one is the Yesh is above and the Ayin is below, so to speak, and the other one is the Yesh is below and the Ayin is above. And this is the difference between the energy and the containers, that the energy sees it from the Ayin, the energy recognizes its source, so it senses that there's nothing but Hu Levadei ve'ein Zulase, nothing but the divine. The container knows it has an identity, Chacham, Chesed, Gvura, so on. So it senses, yes, there is a source, but I am an entity, and I'm subjugated to that source. That's Yechud Tatah. More specifically, this is the difference between Chetenis HaKelim and Primis HaKelim. That outer container senses the Yesh is below and the Ayin is above, and the Primis HaKeli senses the deeper bittul, the Yechud Law. That was the summation of, he breaks it down in more details, and obviously he concludes there that the real bittul is in Keter, the Primis HaKeser. But it's all about levels. But generally speaking, in Atzilus, the outer container and the inner container, remember the whole thing was being discussed first, it's energy and then container. But whatever you apply to energy and container, more specifically is outer container, inner container, and outer container. That ultimately, the general bittul of Atzilus is one that senses the Yechudi Law, the higher. Okay. So now it continues in chapter 293. By Inyan to explain this idea of these two levels of bittul, of these two levels of And this, of course, is very relevant to the whole discussion of the interface, of how yesh can be integrated and fused with ayin, how an identity and existence like ours that has a specific personality becomes connected to the divine, which is beyond any specific personality. So now remember, he said in the previous chapter that even the das tachten of Atzilus, even the lower perspective, has a sense of the higher perspective. That was a critical theme there. Like he said, that even the primus akeli is mizdama, el has similarities to the energy of the bittul of Yechudi Allah. The only difference is, one is the bittul itself, it feels that bittul. The other is because it gets submerged in it, which will be explained in the next chapter in 294. But even the inner container has a sense of the bittul of the Yechudi Allah of Tzalmenu. So even the Museinu also has a sense of Kin Musein, of the higher of Tzalmenu. So now he's going to explain what that means, because he's explained that even das tachen Atzilus is not similar to das tachen of Nivraim. So essentially, we're really talking now. He's adding a third level. In Atzilus itself, you have Tzelem and Mus, which Erin Keli or Primus Akeli and Chitzenis Akeli, where one senses Yechudi Law and one is Yechudi Tatah. And now he's saying even the lower level in Atzilus is still higher than the bittul in the next level in Beriyah. That's what he's going to explain right now, the difference between that. So essentially we end up having three levels: Salmenu Demusenu, which is Yechudi Allah, Yechudi Tatah in Atzilus, and then there's Das Tachten in Nivraim, in Beriyah, and lower. Okay? This needs explanation because since there's a distinction in Atzilus between these two, so you're saying even the lower level in Atzilus, even the inner container has a sense of that type of beyond. So what's the difference between that and a lower? In other words, what's the difference between that and real Das Tachten? In other words, you're saying that Das Tachten, the lower perspective, has a sense of the higher perspective in Atzilus. So then what is the difference between the lower perspective and the higher perspective? So the answer is going to be, now he's going to explain, because even the lower perspective in Atzilus is higher than the real lower perspective as we have it down here in Beriyah. So he says so. The way the emanations of Atzilus know the divine is completely different than the way the creatures know the divine. Even the lower perspective of Atzilus, even the containers, even the outer containers of Atzilus. Okay. The ideas in Evroim by Hergish Shalem b'chinas Ayin Alaki b'chinas ideas metziyus levad. Lo b'chinas mehus klal. So I said, since we learned this, I'm just going to go quickly over this piece. Okay. So he explains the difference between ideas and mehus, hasagas and mehus, ideas and metziyus, and hasagas and mehus. What's metziyus and mehus? So we discussed in the previous discussion of this chapter, metziyus is describing the function or the description of something. Mehus, like the word applies, mehus means mahu. What is it? So to say a table, that's metziyus. What is it? We say a table. A table is made out of wood. A table can be used to study on, to eat on. So as soon as you speak about mehus, you speak about mahu. You're giving some deeper analysis of the object, or whatever it is that's being called, the mehus of whatever it is that we're talking about. So the difference is, he's saying that the way Nivroim, the way we understand things through empirical observation, or whatever other way tools we use to conceive or perceive of something, is metziyus. So obviously, he's talking about here a lakus. So our knowledge of the divine is not because we have an intimate we intimately can sense it, but we know that there's something there. But if someone would describe, tell me what your soul is like. No one's ever seen a soul. I know there's a soul. How do I know there's a soul? Because I'm alive. And I know when a person, God forbid, dies, there's something missing. But what is the soul? Mahu, mehus, neshama, is it's a different level. So our knowledge of the Ayin Eliki, of the divine, Ayin means the mystery, or that amorphous sense of energy, divine energy, that gives us sustenance, is only a metziyus klal. It's not at all the mehus, mahu, what is it like, this divine. Because the creatures, meaning us, do not at all know this mehus of this ayin eliki. So he's not saying because we have limited knowledge, which we do have. Is because if we actually knew more of it, not just that it exists, we wouldn't be able to be defined entities, a defined ego like we have. Let's think for a second. If we can relate it to what the soul really was like, we would be soul-like. We wouldn't be body-like. So there's a certain element of mystique, mystery, concealment, you could say, that for the yesh to manifest as a yesh, an identity, its source has to be somewhat concealed. I'm just thinking of an example of it. A child in its mother's womb is called uber yerech imay, according to halacha. What does uber yerech imay means? That the embryo is yerech, is like an organ. It's literally like a kidney. But meaning like an organ of the woman, which is relevant to halacha. For example, God forbid, in the areas of abortion, as opposed to, let's say, Christianity, Judaism believes, you don't believe in abortion, but abortion because you're not allowed to cut out a part of yourself. But if there's a danger to the mother, you can do it. Why? Why not say, how could you take one life for another? Because not really a life yet. It's a life. Not that, God forbid, not. But it's a life that's still part of the woman. So as such, you can say, as long as you're submerged in the ayin, in your source of your life, you can't really be an independent entity. It requires the child to emerge from the womb, cut the umbilical cord, and that's when you start getting an independent identity. If we psychologically and physiologically and emotionally and spiritually continue to sense that we're inside the embryo, we're an embryo inside of someone else, we could not be a yesh. So the whole purpose of existence requires that there be some, not cutoff point, but some detachment. So in other words, reality is mehus. The fact there is even a metziyus means that something has been concealed. So in truth, if someone had their eyes open, they would see the mehus of everything all the time. As it is, the world is created like a shell. Within that shell is a mehus. So what is the nevroim? What did the creatures see? What do we created entities see? Well, since we see metziyus, because if we sense the mehus of elikus, what it really was, then we would no longer be the yesh that we are, the entity, the defined ego that we are. So that explains why it's that way. Now he's going to explain the process. How does the process work? How is it in actuality possible that the yesh does not sense something that is so vital, its energy source? The mehus of it, in other words, because the creation of nivroim, of us, of created entities, is in the form of ein arech. The creation is not close. It's not like the creator, we sense a closeness. It's through ein arech, it's through a distance, through an infinite distance. לגמרי, העין הלקי בחינת חלם והסתר מהם, לישני דרק metziyus ולמehus כלל. And therefore, the Ayin Eliki, that divine, what we call nothingness not as a nothing, but for us, it's a mysterious energy. It's an unknown energy, is completely concealed to the point that the creatures, only know that it exists, but they don't know what it's like, what its personality is like. So let me just explain what means creation of Shlei Be'erech, a creation that's Be'erech. When a teacher, for example, teaches a student, you can't call that an infinite distance in how the idea is being transmitted. It's true that's not a creation, but just as an example, why? Because the teacher has to apply himself to the student. The student sees the teacher, and though the teacher may be much more bright than the student, but there's a closeness there, and the transmission happens through closeness, not through distance. Distance would be if you suddenly were sitting in a room and an idea just fell into your head. You say, where did it come from? And we say, where's the teacher? Who taught me? Who gave me that idea? If we're sitting with the teacher, it's very clear. The teacher is looking at a book. The teacher is conveying an idea. It's a closeness between teacher and student. But when it comes from a place where you don't sense where it's coming from, that's coming from a Shlei Be'erech place. It means it's not in any way something you can relate to. So therefore, the teacher, you can get to know the mehus of the teacher because he's sitting with you. But an idea that comes into your head and you can't precisely put your point, you can't see the mehus, what it's really like. You know why? Because it's coming to you in a Shlei Be'erech Dika way. So that explains why it's that way. So in other words, the fact is, if we knew the mehus, we wouldn't be a yesh. But what's the process of how that happens? Because the creation happens with a Shlei Be'erech, with a type of, I would say, a cataclysmic jump, or maybe more of a quantum leap, as opposed to like iluv ol, cause and effect, that's close to one another. Another example would be.
We're able to identify.
No, they identify that it exists, but you can't identify what it's like because you're not on its level.
Can we identify that it's godly?
Yeah, and you can deduce through process of his bonus the concept of Yechudi love. That's a separate issue. We're talking about what we're capable to comprehend. Remember, he's comparing the difference between Das Tachten of Atzilus and Das Tachten of Nevrayim. It's not finished. Let's see where he's going to go with this.
Yeah.
Obviously, the point is to climb the ladder from that level of perception to the next level. But right now, on its own, we don't have a understanding of the mehus of the divine for this reason.
At the basic level, before we climb the level of deduction or understanding, is a person of that.
There's no mehus. It's not mehus at all.
Not mehus at all.
That's what he says.
Include it is godly.
Why not? Of course it's godly. Godly is simply a word you're using to explain the mysteries. You can call it anything you like. What does that tell you? That when you say godly, what does godly mean? Godly is just knowing that there's something that's godly. What is God like? What is the godly energy like?
But there's a God, and you can say.
When you say the word God, you mean metziyus of God or mehus of God? The metziyus of God. There's a creator.
The Herbish is God. So we're saying that the idiom of Yehuda Tato,
is that there is a godly force, like there's a soul inside your body. That's all you can say.
One could say that. It's a reasonable conclusion.
As soon as you say something, that's a metziyus. We're talking about mehus now. To say something godly doesn't mean that you know anything about it.
Yeah.
They said, we know there's a soul, but you don't know anything about the soul unless someone told you, or unless you learned about it somewhere, or you studied it.
Or you're alive, and then somebody.
No, you start studying that. You start realizing the soul has the power to give you vision, to give you sight, to sound, other faculties. Okay, so we established that it's in the form of Shlei Be'erech. That's why it's concealed. And that's why this knowledge can only accomplish this awareness because you're only aware of the metziyus, the existence of it, but not its inner personality. That's why it causes only bittul hayesh levad, which means that you recognize it's not all about me. There's something that's giving me sustenance. But that bittul, that recognition, that subjugation is only bittul hayesh, which means it doesn't eliminate, annihilate your existence, it just sublimates your existence. So you recognize there's more than you. This is a Maimer Chazal. That when God extended his finger, his small finger, but among them, it says that God extended small. If you do it, that's boya ktana b'chinas malchus Atzilus mokan nevraim. What does small finger mean? It's a metaphor for the level of malchus Atzilus, the lowest level of Atzilus, which is the source for the creatures of Beriyah, Tzira, and Asiyah. So what does it mean? What happened? So God sustains existence. But the Chemai Chazal said, but then when God extended a little more than the regular measured energy that's usually enough to sustain existence, God extended a little more. There was a little more revelation from Malchus, which this is the meaning of he extended his small finger, more than the regular. So he's explaining that means what? That he didn't just have the gili of the metziyus. Till now, God created, but then he revealed a little more of the source of energy. So that means he revealed the mehus, what it is, not just that it is, but what it is. What did that cause? Sorfan. That caused them to burn up. That's the Maimer Chazal, that when a God extended his small finger among them, among the angels, it caused them to burn. What means sorfan? Is bittul metziyus and legami, that they completely were annihilated. They were consumed by it. So you see clearly that the yesh, for it to be, cannot have this mehus because that's what it will cause. And therefore, the knowledge that we have only of the metziyus, of the divine existence, not its being, not its personality, only creates a bittul, a yesh. Only the fact that we get sublimated by it, but not annihilated by it. This is Nivrayim. Okay. So now he explained Das Tachten, our perspective, how we see the divine, as opposed to now he's going to explain. Netzolim are the emanations. When you say Nivrayim, you mean creatures. Netzolim are emanations of the divine. They're not the divine itself, source, but they're emanations. You can't call them a created entity. So what is their perception like? Hagam shein gamkin b'chinas yesh ma'ayin. They too are yesh ma'ayin. Like he keeps referring to. Like it says, wisdom, which is Atzilus, wisdom of Atzilus, or in general Atzilus. Ma'ayin timotza, from where are you? Also comes from Ayin. Shachachma nimtza ma'ayin de Keter b'chinas yesh. Because Chachma is still a yesh compared to the Ayin of Keter. Its source, it's also yesh ma'ayin. It's not relative to each other. They're also, in a way, there's a quantum leap. She adds in the parentheses, to be more precise, based on the whole discussions in the previous chapters, it's the outer dimension of Chachma, because the inner dimension, which is the beginning of the cosmic order, because the inner dimension is actually is more connected to the Ayin of Keter. But the outer level of Chachma is Yesh compared to that. So here we have a question. We just said that the Nevraim are Yesh Ma'ayin, and in order for them to be a Yesh, you have to have the concealment of the Ayin, the mehus. And if it extended a little more than necessary, it would annihilate them. So you say now that Netzolim, even though they too are Yesh Ma'ayin, like it says Chachma is Ma'ayin, the outer Chachma, Kaponim, Hari Ein Zeh B'chinas Yesh Mamish. Nevertheless, and this is the key distinction, in Atzilus it's not really a Yesh. It's not actual Yesh. It's a form of expression relative to the Ayin of Keter, the bittul of Keter. The Chachma is Yesh, Atzilus is Yesh, but it's not Yesh Mamish, as we would say the Nevraim are. I was going to explain what that means. He's going to explain it now with an example of how we process ideas and information. Like it says elsewhere, the idiom yesh ma'ayin Atzilus, yesh ma'ayin Atzilus, zewal derech. That's an example for that is mevin dover meter dover. That It's like understanding one idea from another idea. We say bina, mevin dover meteich dover. So a teacher, or you read an idea, and that idea spawns another idea. There's a concept like that. Shemeteich seichel echad umevin seichel acher. One idea, from one idea, he understands another seichel, another idea, another concept. Now this new concept, shezelch seichel chodesh, sheinem mehus seichel akei mamash. This new concept, this new idea, this new seichel, this new intellect, is not mehus seichel akei mamash. It's not actually exactly from the same mehus, from the same nature and personality of the previous seichel, previous idea. What does that mean? So he's explaining by comparison. It's not like klal prat, where you present first a general idea, the general outline, or the general idea about something, and then you break it into details. That's one example. Or not one example. It's one example, but two parts to it. One, you break it down to details, and you flesh it out. You expand on them. Shari kol seichel ma'aprat. Shari kol seichel misparet u'misrachim b'ribi protim b'ribi inyanim. Because every seichel, obviously, every idea, when you dissect it, breaks down into details and expands into many details, into many different channels. This is not Maven Dover Metech Dover. Because in this case, it's from the same mehus seichel. It's the same. It's the same nature of that idea. It's just that idea is broken down into details. It's the same seichel, same idea that was then broken into detail and expanded upon. And that's why when you break it down into detail and you expand, you understand it better. It gets better explained. Because it's exactly the same seichel. That's one example. That's not the case that he wants to say. He was saying it by contrast. Well, we'll soon get back to what we're talking about. Another example, that's not dover b'derech dover. Same thing as the other way around, the summary of ideas. This is the opposite. You start with a general outline, a general concept, and you break it into details. So those details and that expansion is all part of the original idea. Then there's another way. You sum up an idea. After all the details and all the things, you come to a summary and say, here's a summarized version. So a summary too, is also exactly that idea, or else it's not a summary of that idea. It's not a new concept, it's a summary of a concept that was discussed. Only it came now, it's now in a summarized and condensed version. For who inyan ilav. This is what we call ilav, cause and effect. Ilav means not just cause and effect, but also that there's a natural flow from one state to the other. Ilav. Why? Because the seichel, that same idea, simply evolved. Ilav, you can also say, as one place, and I think the Tafsir Samachay, the Rebbe Rashab, says ilav means that if without any extra effort something flows, it'll lead to the next stage. Yesh ma'ayin, for example, requires some type of jolt, some type of shift, some change. Ilav means if something flows, it's going to ultimately flow into the next level without a particular you don't need a new catalyst or a new entity. One extends from the other. So when you say summary from seichel, that's just a natural flow. You don't require some new seichel here. Someone is summarizing an idea that was before, or an idea breaks down into details. That's ilav. It's a natural flow from one idea to. But now he's going to compare it. That's ilav. That's natural.
Why is it so natural?
Because after I speak, let's say for an hour and explain something, and then I summarize it, it's a natural thing to summarize what you just said. It doesn't require any new seichel.
It doesn't require any new effort. to spread it.
Well, effort, listen, everything is effort, but I'm saying it doesn't require a new concept. No one has to sit and conceive of a new idea. You're taking the idea and you're condensing it, you're summarizing it. You're going to see here. But let's say, but a person who's listening to it says, you know what, this idea just spawned a new idea, that's already not ill, because that was not necessarily a natural flow. Something new was added here. Let's, for argument's sake, I'm discussing this chapter, and there's a scientist sitting in the room. He says, your idea reminds me of something I studied in science. That's Maven Dover Metel Dover already. That's not, he's adding something that this scientist, only he would know because he knows his science. But the understanding of another seichel, of another idea, from this original idea, that's not from the same nature of the original seichel, like I just gave the example with the scientist. He's already applying it or comparing it to another idea or it's spawning another idea. It's not the same thing any longer. Because this is clearly from that seichel, from the original idea, he understands another idea, which was not even mentioned in the original idea. So let's say I speak about this subject and someone in quantum mechanics comes and says, you know what? This is similar to an idea in subatomic particles. Yeah, one idea led to the other, but it's not necessarily a natural flow. It's an additional concept that is now suddenly being introduced, which is not you would not call that a summary of the ideas. Very practically put, it wouldn't be in the Keter. In the chapter summary, you wouldn't put in someone's application that is applying from another science, and even if it was spawned from this chapter. Because it's like distinguishing, here's the idea, and now this idea leads to corollaries or other ideas that came out of that original idea. It's not the same thing as when you say details of an idea or a summary of an idea. That's the bottom line. I mean, and a simple example would be, if someone summarized it, let's say, as I said, the teacher said something, you would summarize it. You would not add what someone else said. You'd say, and then someone else said that idea spawned another idea. And nevertheless, he's going now the other way around. It's also not a completely different mehus. It's not of a completely different nature. Like in this example that I just gave. It's not just the guy came up with something in quantum mechanics that has nothing to do with what we're discussing. It's directly related to the discussion. Because it's close to the mehus, the nature of that idea, the different idea from which he derived this idea. Because the comprehension and understanding of this new idea came from the original idea. So if let's say, like in this case with the scientist, he heard a concept and he says, that answers a question or explains an idea or spawns a new idea in my scientific theories. So it's another mehus seichel, it's a different seichel, but it's directly connected to this idea here because it came directly as a derivative of the original idea. How did he come to this new idea? It came from this original idea. And therefore, we must say there's a connection between them. Basically, the Rebbe Rashab is doing here, showing how you can have one thing connected, understanding from another. Remember, this is all coming to explain Atzilus, the yesh of Atzilus, as opposed to the yesh of Beriyah. You could have something that is outside of an original idea, but it's still from the same personality, as opposed to something which is just the details or the summary of the original idea. Okay. Also, you must say, he's going a step further. You have to also say that this new idea was originally encompassed in the original idea. Rakshu behelamboy. Only there it's concealed in the original idea. And it's concealed more than the details are concealed in a concept. When you say, for example, that something is an idea and then you break into details, the details are also concealed. But they're not as concealed as a new idea that spawns out of this original idea. Because the details are just a matter of details. Because the details are klal prat. There's the general idea and the details of that idea. The same thing you can say about the summary, though he doesn't mention it right here. However, the new idea, that was there encompassed in the original idea. Because even this example I gave with quantum mechanics, which may not be a perfect example because you could say it's from a completely different idiom, that's science and this is Chassidus. But it doesn't matter. Let's say one idea in Chassidus that was spawned from another idea, but they're not the same idea originally. So obviously it's included in it because the theory that you were studying has many different applications, and one of them is going to be the comparison or the derivative of a completely new idea. But it's concealed much more than the details are concealed. So it's very much concealed. It's obvious because it's something new. Anything that is different, I told you, there's a natural flow of things, and then there's something requires an extra thing. Because you won't get, look, every seichel that you speak about can have thousands of derivatives, and you don't usually go there necessarily. You need something to extract from the original idea this maven dover metek dover. You need a person who's able to do that. There are some people, for example, that can explain well something they heard, and not necessarily are able to spawn new ideas from the original idea. So that's the reason it is. It's much more concealed because it's a distance. And this is, you can say this is something like that. It's not within it. Like the details are included in the klal, in the general concept, very directly there. They're there, and especially once you study it in the details and you summarize it, the summary has everything in it that the original idea has, except it's summarized. He's saying now that the way an idea contains in it the potential of other ideas, maven dover, meter dover, other ideas that will be spawned or will be generated from the original idea, uses the expression shenesi be'atzmas seichel hachodesh. It carries within it. Nesi is usually more detached, more apart than when you say something is kil or something. Like I said, klal prat. So klal would be, think of it like this. Think of you cook a meal and you put all kinds of ingredients in it. And then the ingredients are all in there. You may not be able to see it immediately, but you could technically, just like you put it in there, you could separate it. I'm not talking about a chant. I'm talking about, let's say, but when you talk about something that potentially can come out of it, that's not really there, you can say it carries it. Meisa means something that carries something, instead of saying it's actually in there. In other words, as much as you dig, you're not going to find it. The details you're going to find. This new idea you're not going to find, even though it is not. It will be derived from that original idea. So you call it shenimtza. So I say, and that's why you need specifically a maven, mishu novin, an understanding person, to derive one. You don't need the same type of wisdom to bring details out of a klal, out of a general principle, than to take one idea from another. You need a particular type of maven, someone who's good at that. There are people who are very good extrapolators who can take an idea and they say, this idea, we derive from it another 50 new ideas. Nevertheless, it's still encompassed there. So even though it's not like quite the details are included in the general principle, but still it's somewhere encompassed in there. It's more of I would say like in a nebulous form, it's encompassed. And this is the reason that it also brings an inner depth, a depth to the original idea. Says in Yiddish. This expresses a depth even in the original idea. Because if it was not at all included in the original idea, if it was completely separate, it wouldn't add depth. Like in this case where the quantum mechanic guy adds something, so it's truly he came something that was dover meter dover. He took one idea and revealed, or a derivative of another idea, which is not like details, a new idea that was encompassed originally, the theory of the original idea. And that adds depth in return, because with that example that he gives, or that other idiom, the other area of thought where this idea now originated from the original one, gives depth to the original idea, because you see its application, or you see another angle of it, and so on. The kashem shalvon seichel zeh, because just as the understanding of this idea, ma seichel hakedim, this new idea, is from the original idea, and kamekin haru meisem emi primi ba seichel hakedim. So it's like a back and forth, give and take. Just like this new idea originated from the original idea, the first idea, the same thing, it returns something. It adds depth, emik pnimi, inner depth, baseichel hakedim, into the original idea. And all this is because it's not a different entity completely. A different entity would be, we have these examples, where let's say we're learning something, and someone comes up and says, well, I learned in another mimer so-and-so. And often you'll hear me say, well, it's nothing to do with this. Obviously, everything is everything, but it's nothing to do, because it's not adding, it's a different approach, or it's not relevant. In other words, not every idea that one thinks of when you hear an idea is necessarily coming from that original idea. Sometimes you're just bringing your own stuff in. Or there's some common denial. Someone says, Mamala Kalam, and says, oh, I learned somewhere else about Malakalam. That may not have anything to do with this. So we see here already 3 levels of how an idea, so there's one level as an idea has details in it. That's the simplest, or summary of the idea. Then you have the other extreme, where one idea has nothing to do with the original idea. It's just free association. I said something, someone else says something. And there's no real correlation. And then there's Maven Dover Meter Dover. And in between, where it's not details, it's a new idea, but it's connected to, and it's outside of the original idea, but it's not outside in the sense. It's not outside meaning it belongs in this context. But it's a new idea because it's not a natural expression of the original idea. It required a maven, it required some expertise, like I keep giving the example, let's say scientific example, or scientific application, or scientific parallel to an idea that we learned. And the parallel is very consistent. If it wasn't, then it's not Dover Meter Dover. Then it's another idea, fine, that's nice. But it's not connected. So what he's established here is that you can have one seichel. Maven Dover Meter Dover is not it's not the details of the original idea. It's a new idea, but it's all contained in potential state and nebulous state in the original idea. And it adds seichel in return. That's why it adds. If it was a completely new idea, it will just confuse. It won't add anything to the original idea. It'll just be a distraction. Okay. Now he's going another example, a 4th level. This is not like seichel that comes to an example or a riddle. So you see, when I said before with quantum mechanics, I was not saying it as an example for what we're saying. I'm talking about a complete idea that was spawned from another idea. You hear a concept. Let's say we hear the concept of we talked about on Atzmus, or in the higher, the HaKolol, the energy that's encompassed in the source. There's Keich HaGvul, Keich HaBiyun. It's all there. And someone says, I have the same idea. That gives me an idea of how the same thing can be applied in science. That's not necessarily a mashal. That's an idea that spawned another idea. Now he's bringing another example. That sometimes with seichel, we add ideas by giving an example or a riddle. So in this case, the seichel, original seichel, is completely concealed in this new garment. And what comes out of it, the mashal is of course an example to understand the seichel better, but it's through a different mehus completely. Like the examples that King Solomon gave. Harigama sheboim ala nimshal. So even after you understand how they're an example for the nimshal, for the thing they're coming to explain, ein ze k'moi chachma shleima klal. That's not the wisdom of Shleima at all. Well, a mashal, like he says in Terer, is from a dover zar. It's always from a strange item. That's the whole idea of a mashal. The idea, why do we need an example when we want to explain something, is because the person who you're explaining it to may not appreciate or not be able to understand the subtle or the idea without an example that relates to them. So we have, for example, in the Medrash, you find very often the Ma'adavar Dema. To what is this thing compared? To Melech Basar Adam, to a king on earth who sent a decree. Or on Rosh Hashanah, what is it compared? God is compared to a king on earth who is going to be crowned and anointed anew, right? Since we can't relate to God directly because it's invisible, so we give an example of a king. This is a king that we know, someone we can relate to. Or all the other examples we may use from physical, empirical realities around us. And I gave before the example of an embryo. To understand the idea of being encompassed in something before being an independent entity. I'm using an example. The example itself is a completely foreign entity to the original seichel. It's coming to explain it, but it's not the seichel itself. It's not from the mehus seichel. It's a new idiom. It's a new framework. That's why it's so good, example, because it's coming into a place where the student or the recipient is able to relate to, because it's on his terms. Like, this way, for example, even what he's saying here, this whole thing is an example. We don't know what Atzilus is like. We're not neshamas of Atzilus. We don't relate to it. But by giving an example of these different ways of how we understand things, maybe we're beginning to get a concept starts making sense because we found something where we can talk about it. We found a language that we can discuss. So now when you compare the mashal to the nimshal, the mashal obviously explains the idea. It's that idea. It's a mashal for that idea. But the mashal itself, you can't call it from the mehus of the seichel. And the best proof is very simple. Not everybody's good at giving an example. Like, you could have somebody who's very good at explaining something, and they're not good at finding examples for people that are not in their league. And then there are people who are able to give very good examples, simple examples, even to a child. That needs a different type of seichel completely. It's a seichel, it's a seichel, it's a very profound seichel. The guy has to understand the idea much better. But above all, you're not digging, in the original seichel, you're not going to find the mashal. As much as you dig, you'll never find it there. The details that we talked about, the summary, are all there in the original idea. Even the Maven Dover Metech Dover is there in the original idea. As he says, it carries it. It's a theory that carries many other theories. But the example is not in the original idea. It requires taking, let's put it this way, someone in Atzilus would never come up with a physical example because they don't live in the physical world. Remember, as difficult it is for us to understand Atzilus does not relate to Gashmis. So when I give you a physical example of something, it's not included in the original concept. It's coming from a different place. It's coming from an example that we are able to relate to because we have it in our world. Or if I said something right now and you say your business, you find an example, only you would be able to come up with it. It's not there in the seichel. You're saying, I have an example for what we just discussed in my area of expertise. So the example is an example to help understand the idea, but the example itself is not in any way included. He's just using, I'll tell you why, because the chida mashal is going to be more like Beriyah. Maybe Dover Meter Dover is Atzilus, you understand? See, a mashal, therefore, is not from the original personality of the seichel. It's not made up of the same thing. That's the main thing. So what we have here right now, he's basically given us 4 different ways of how a seichel, one idea, has manifestations. One is details and summary. That's obviously the closest to the original idea. That would be, I don't know what he's going to say in the nimshal here, but that would be like Keter, probably. That's so close. That's like the details of the divine being spelled out. Then there's Atzilus, Maven Dover, Meter Dover, where it's a new idea, but the idea is encompassed and adds to the original idea. That's two. Why did I say four?
You put two together.
Okay. Yeah, three things actually. And then there's the Chida, Mashal B'Chida, which is the other extreme. Oh, I know I said four, because I said earlier another idea completely, but he's using Mashal. Remember I said an idea that has nothing to do with the original idea? That's just confusing? That's what I meant. That's what I meant by four. They can be even worse than a Mashal B'Chida. Someone comes up with an idea that has nothing to do with this existing idea. But no, but he's talking about a Mashal B'Chida. Okay, so really there's three things. There's the details and there's the summary. There's Dover Meter Dover, which is like it comes from the original idea, but it's something that would not have naturally flown from it. And then you have here a Mashal V'Chid, an example or a riddle, that even when you come to the Nimshal, even when you understand, it's still not the mehus. It's not Chochmah Shleima Klal. It's not the wisdom of Shleima originally. So Shleima has wisdom. Then, using that wisdom, he was able to find examples. From those examples, you come to understand the Nimshal. But that's not necessarily the original wisdom itself.
Okay. Mashal said that it can actually the original idea is enclosed in the Mashal.
Yeah, but the Mashal is not enclosed in the original idea. Mm-hmm. That's the issue here. Mm-hmm. It's a new garment. But understanding one idea from another is not a separate entity. It's not a different nature. Now he's explaining this whole thing back to where we want. It's known that an example, a metaphor, and a riddle, that is the parsa, the curtain, the veil, haparsa v'amasach, the curtain and the veil, and the curtain, amasach, sheben Atzilus l'Beriyah, that separates, it's between Atzilus and Beriyah. The essence spheres the Beriyah becomes mehus achel gab Atzilus, because the 10 spheres of Beriyah are completely different mehus. It doesn't say the gamri, are a different mehus, a different personality than the spheres as they are in Atzilus. Like he says in Tereh, Parsha Vayera, the famous Bat Pasach Aliyah. So therefore, since it's a different mehus, how does that happen? Because in a sense, Beriyah compared to Atzilus is like a moshel or chida, an example, metaphor compared to, that's the parsha. So the parsha is like a veil that veils the original idea. Now it's in metaphor form, which is a foreign object, a foreign identity.
Why is the parsha the original idea?
Parsha is not original idea. Parsha is the example. Moshel v'chida, that's the level of the parsha. An example or a riddle is a concealment. It's a new idiom. It's a new, as I said, it's a foreign. You're using a foreign example.
Is that where the mashal starts, or is
that is? He says that is mashal chida. That is the level of the parsha.
Then what do we call the spheres of Beriyah?
He doesn't say here yet. We'll see. Maybe that's the derivative seichel that comes from the mashal. That's the seichel that comes out of the mashal. Remember, it's still chachma bina, and it's still the 10 spheres, but it's now through a veil.
Yeah.
That veil is the veil of the mashal. Look, remember, everything is a mashal in life. When you look out and see, when we use examples, those examples are what we relate to. So we're relating to a concept, but it's the example that's necessary for us to relate to it. You cannot relate to it without the example. Let's put it that way. The inyan mevid dover metech dover zeh dugmal b'chinas yesh ma'ayin Atzilus. Now he's going back now to explain it. And they have one idea from another idea, not through a foreign example. That's the yesh ma'ayin of Atzilus.
You haven't explained what's called yesh.
The ima yesh ein zeh b'chinas. Yes, 1 second. The ima yesh ein zeh b'chinas ilah v'olol mamash, even though you can't call this actual ilah v'olol, cause and effect, or a natural flow, like we said it before about the details or the summary of an idea, like a seichel, like an idea that comes in a summarized form. At the same time, you cannot also, it's also not another personality. It's not another nature either. Like we discussed earlier, the new idea that still has a relationship to the original idea, and it's included in it, like it's discussed elsewhere. So you have here not quite details or summary, which is literally all part of the original seichel. You have a new seichel, but it's not a new seichel of a new personality, like an example would be. An example, immediately you're using something that is not there in the original idea. It's an example from a table, from a chair, from a king, from a tree, from an apple. You're right away using another thing to explain an earlier thing. Even though is not using another thing to explain the original thing, it's an idea that spawned from the original idea. So it is a part, an emanation, but very close relationship with the original one. Or relatively to example, it's closer. Let's finish reading this. Let's see what he explains, and we'll see what needs explanation. Now he's adding the second component. Remember before he said that the Nevroim are created through distance. Not like a ilah v'ol, where something, like a teacher and a student. So now he's saying that Tzolim, the emanations, they were emanated in a form of closeness. Kiruv v'erech. In contrast to what he said before, that it's shaloi b'erech. Ein arich l'gamri, huh? Al kein b'b'chinas hadash lehem gam b'chinas das tachton b'chinas yidiyas mehus ha'ayin. And since they were created into this closeness, that's why their knowledge, their awareness, their perception, even the lower perception, das tachton. In other words, even what he said about the chitzenis hakelim, the outer containers, is also an awareness, a perception of the mehus ha'ayin, not just the metziyus, that they actually perceive the nature and the inner personality of the ayin, of the divine mystique, the divine energy. And therefore, the bittul it causes is a bittul metziyus, not hayesh. Not like we said before that the yesh, where the ayin is concealed, and it comes from distance, infinite distance. So there, the most it does, the awareness of the knowledge that God exists, the metziyus of the ayin eliki, in other words, that it's there, causes us to be sublimated. This causes, however, because it's close, this causes, and its appreciation of the mehus, what it really is, the divine, it causes a bittul metziyus, that they lose their entire personality, as if they're worthless, if they're nothing compared to the essence, to the source. But so then if that's the case, why don't they completely disappear? Like you said before about, let's say, an ayin of Keter, primus Keter. But because this idea of ayin mokal yesham netzolim, al kein ein zeh b'chinas bittul metziyus legamri. Because since this awareness, this perception, is still an ayin that's a source for the yesh and netzolim, it's still, like he said in the end of the previous chapter, that since it's still a yesh, it is an identity. They do have identity in Atzilus, so they don't completely become nullified. Like I said, it's mevin davar miter davar. It is a separate idea. It is a new idea. It's a second idea. So it's not. So it's not so it's not like the original idea and the details or the summary of the original idea. So there's something new here, and therefore it completely is nullified by the higher level, but not a complete annihilation of its identity.
It doesn't only see itself as a bittul zukas. It sees itself as having more metziyus than the idea of the inspe.
I'm sorry?
It seems like it has more metziyus than the idea of inspe.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, as he said in the previous chapter, because the source recognizes its significance, so it doesn't completely lose itself. When you talk about Pnimius HaKeser, the source is so beyond anything.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's a complete nullification. Here you have a bittul, but the bittul is still a bittul metziyus of something there, of a but it's still bittul metziyus. It really comes down to three levels of bittul. One is that divine is so far apart. So even Atzilus doesn't exist, doesn't have any value. Another example I've given in the past of numbers. The infinite set of numbers is infinitely distant from all the individual numbers, but they're still all numbers. You can't say the numbers, even finite numbers, don't exist. You could say they're nullified, they're all equal. A trillion is equal to 1 compared to infinite. But let's say something outside of the set of numbers altogether. So even what it is, even its value as a number doesn't have any value. So in Atzilus, it senses the infinite. Beriyah is not even sensing the infinite. Beriyah senses the infinite not in any closeness. It's more of a knowing that it's there. You could almost say it's outside of the set of numbers, below the set of numbers. It's like the numbers as they evolve through an example, moshel, chida, to a lower level. Let's say apples. In Beriyah, it's like apples. So apples are nullified because, whatever we are, we're not compared to the original number, and definitely not to the infinite. Atzilus at least is in the same category. It's numbers, but it's not infinite. So it's completely bittul b'metziyus, but you can't say what it is doesn't exist because the infinite set of numbers recognizes that you're a number. Whereas that which is apples doesn't even recognize that it's apples. So therefore, in Keter, that's the infinite itself. There's no longer there's a place. I'm sorry, beyond even the set of numbers. So nothing has value there. It's just ways of understanding bittul. Okay. Okay. I'll understand this according to what we discussed earlier in chapter 235, the Ayin Hashem Echad, in the concept of Hashem Echad. So what did we discuss? Then there was the explanation of the three levels of if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
The three levels of bittul and One is the is similar to the source. Two, it wants to be what was the second one? The third was to be included in the source. Similar to the source.
Always in the state of the living.
Yeah, that's the second. That's the third. Actually, 1 second. Zesh Lamed Hey is something else. I'm confusing it. 1 second. I thought, 1 second, let me just see something. Yeah, he's actually comparing it to something else. Okay. I thought he was comparing it to the three levels in air. Oh yeah, okay. So similar to the source, he feels the source and he wants to be included in it. No, that's not what he's saying here. He's talking to Reish Lamed Hey. What's it say? In Hashem Echad, Shakol Batl Metziyus Mamish, and Enshu Metziyus Klal. When we say God is one, we don't just mean God is one and not many. We mean that God encompasses all of existence. So everything is battle, the metziyus mamish. Everything compared to God is completely nullified. There's nothing exists from that perspective. And what? So then, so what do we say? There's something exists. What does that mean? When we say something exists, the existence of existence is only because Ein Sof, the divine infinite light, gave them value, gave them recognition, gave them space. And we explained there, that this is when the divine energy is extending itself, transmits, is in hamshacha, is extending itself. The beginnes remus Atzmus, because when you talk about Atzmus, when it's not even extending itself, remus Atzmus, the exaltation of Atzmus, ein shayach gam inyan is in smoking ve'erech. There it doesn't give any room and place for anything. Remember I just said with the infinite numbers. The infinite numbers at least give room for numbers. They're infinite from there. They're infinitely distant from the numbers. In the example. The Remus Atzmus, since he's not extending himself, doesn't even want anything, on the level of Remus Atzmus itself, nothing has value. When Ein Sof extends itself, where Atzmus wants to extend itself, that, then you can say that is giving them some value, it's giving them value and space and recognition. I'm sorry, that's the level of Elikim, the name of Elikim, the way it's included in Ein Sof. In other words, Elikim, the name Elikim is already how Ein Sof is manifesting in existence, and therefore it gives space, it gives value. We'll move on, and it's understood that now he's bringing it on a lower level. These two levels he just spoke about, remember he's explaining here the difference between Atzilus and Beriyah, but also Atzilus and Keter. Okay? So Atzilus is a yesh, but not quite yesh. Beriyah is a real yesh mamish. And then there's higher than Atzilus. So it's really three levels of bittul. So now he's applying this now. These two things we just said, how Atzmus is so exalted, and not but hamshacha. So nothing has value there. Then there's how he extends himself. He says this is the two levels of Chetzein Keter and Primus Keter. So it's understood. What's Chetzein Keter? The level where it's already recognizing the emanations. That's why you say Chetzein Keter is Sheresh and Etzalim, is the root of the emanations. Arich recognizes, it's the beginning and recognizes. It's still the source, but it recognizes the emanations. The Primus Keter, Harizah Bechinas Hamelech Hamarem Levade. Remember, these two levels are higher in Atzmus, but he's bringing it down now in Primus Keter. The inner Keter is the level of the king, he's completely separate and completely exalted and above. We can't even say, he's not shayach, he's not capable of saying that he's giving any type of erech, any type of value, any type of value. Only in the outer level of Keter, where this is the beginning, the source of the emanations of Atzilus, there the shaykh, it's possible to say that is giving erech hamokim, that is giving value and space to the emanations. And now, what does the Netzalim feel? Now that we established this, so let me just sum this up. So what do we know from this? That Atzilus is Maven Dover Metech Dover. The experience of Atzilus is it experiences an idea, and from that derives another idea, which is from the original idea. That's Atzilus, and there Atzilus senses this bittul, but you can't say it's completely nullified because Chetzein Keter is giving it value, so it has some value. So you can't say it's as if in Remus Atzmus where there's no value at all. But now he's saying that Netzalim, however, sense both levels. The Netzalim sense and feel the mehus, the real nature and amitis and the truth of the inyan of what's going on here. The way it's in the divine source of the emanator. And they sense that their metziyus of Atzilus and the Solam is not from their own. So they sense that God, the essence of God, does not have to give them any value. But then they sense that their metziyus is not, they feel that they exist. They feel their whole metziyus is only because that higher level that doesn't need to give them value chose to give them value. The higher commission is Aleph. This is what I meant before with the Oyer. This is similar to what this is like what we learned earlier in chapter 281, being an angel lascha, the F is biltacha. The angel lascha, we learned angel lasecha, the F is biltacha. There's nothing but you, besides you, the F is biltacha, which is deeper, ayin and Ephes. Ephes is there's a nothingness without you. The angel lasecha, who shemil baldecha lo yishdavar. This was the levels he spoke about the air, bittul and air. Angel lasecha, there's nothing outside of you, beyond you, besides you, means that without you there's nothing. Aval imcha yesh davar metziyus. That without you nothing can exist. But once you exist, imcha with you, yesh davar metziyus, there is an existence. What does that mean? There's an existence. Not that there's an existence on its own. That this level of the divine, angel lasecha, without you, but with you, I exist. You've given me value. That means Ein Sof has given value to us, to the emanations. And therefore, the bittul of this is bittul she'eino b'chinas metziyus b'fnei atzmei. So, what is the real bittul here? Not that they don't exist, that they're not in existence on their own, but with the divine, they absolutely exist. Aval mokom mokem harihem b'chinas metziyus ba'atzmon. But nevertheless, they are metziyus within themselves. The Atzmus had metziyus because Atzmus gave them existence. But that's not the highest level. That's Atzilus. We'll come out derech moshel, and he's giving an example. Like an example, dogim shebiyam, fish in the sea. Shechayusam u'p'techem u'kedem dafka. Their life sustenance, their life source, their life is when they're inside their source, specifically, explicitly. Their metziyus consists of the feeling that they're in their source. Meaning their source is giving them metziyus. They feel all the time that source. But they exist. There are fish in the sea. So fish, as animals outside of the sea, land inhabitants as Beriyah. There we know there's a source. But we don't feel the source. So there we feel we really exist. Atzilus feels it exists, but it exists only because the source is giving me value. Whereas creatures on land, their life is because they are separate from their source. If their source was revealed, if they were living inside their source, they wouldn't be able to exist. They wouldn't be able to be alive. So some people ask the question, what about air? We're also living in our source. We have to breathe all the time. So first of all, air is invisible. It's not like we sense all the time that we need air. I mean, we take it for granted. Whereas water, it's a very visible thing. Fish need water. They just live within it. But the truth is, it's also more psychological. If we were living all the time and we felt that, we sensed all the time that without air we couldn't exist, yes, we'd also feel like we're in our source. But God made it in a way that we don't sense it that way. As I said, we take it for granted. Fish, even though I never spoke to a fish, but the fact that inside there is a certain type of physical, tangible connection all the time. Like what Rabbi Akiva said, that Jews can't live without Torah, like because the fish can't live without this, the mashal there with the fox. That's why don't you come out? So he said, we can't come out because we can't be sustained. And it's known, this is all by the way of parentheses, to explain the difference between Atzilus and Beriyah. We know the difference between water and land is the difference between the creatures on the of the world, revealed worlds, Alma Dizgalia, the Nevroim, the Alma Discassia, and the creatures of the hidden worlds, which is the sea. Who? What's the difference? The Nevroim, the Alma Discassia, the creatures of the revealed worlds, since their metziyus, their existence, is in a state of yesh, they sense a state, there's an ego. Ego, I don't mean necessarily ego in the conventional meaning, a sense of self. Therefore, their existence is specifically when they don't feel and sense their source. But the creatures in the hidden worlds, ayin, not yesh. Their metziyus is ayin, nothingness. And that's why their metziyus, their being, is specifically in feeling their source. So in other words, sensing a source for us is anathema, is dangerous, because we lose ourselves. For them, that is their sustenance, sensing the source. That is their sustenance. So not only is Atzilus sense its source and senses that the source has given me value, that is its sustenance. It survives on that. For us, that would be our death. Now the purpose is, that's the kavanah, that God wanted a separate entity to feel an independence, and we should come through our avodah to realize that we're dependent, or that we're connected, and we will integrate. But on our own, our personality is yesh is defined by not sensing its source. So when we say we don't see God, and the divine is invisible, that's not just some type of happens to be. That makes us be. That's why we are who we are. We would not be an identity that we are had it not been that way. So essentially, a agnostic universe is necessary for our sustenance. That's how bizarre it becomes. So we cry for Gilei Elokus only because we want to reconnect. But this is exactly what the purpose was, to create such an entity that knows that it has a source, but it doesn't feel its source. Yeah? And that's our sustenance. Our sustenance is that way. Whereas that's still okay. And we don't forget about it. Not only do we not feel the source in a mehus way, we know it's a metziyus is there. We know that air is, we know the fact that air gives us life. But we don't feel the mehus of it, like a fish feels the mehus of the water. In addition to that, we don't therefore also feel that it's the divine that gives us value. We think we have our own value. Whereas in Atzilus, its only value is because with Atzmus, that's why it exists. That's Ein Zulasecha. Efes Biltecha, as we learned there, is even with Atzmus you don't exist. As I said, the beyond infinite numbers. That's Keter. That's what Keter senses. Okay. This is even the Nevroim of Alma Discassia. You see, this is already Nevroim. That even the creatures of the hidden worlds, like the fish, their sustenance is sensing their source. Beriyah. Usually, Alma Discassia can be Beriyah. He's not going into it here, but he's just, remember, it's bringing a comparison. So, the Kolshkein, Sheyuvan came by Atzilus. And even more so, we can understand this in the air of Atzilus. Shekol metziyus is ayin. Their whole metziyus is ayin. Is nullification into the source. Al kain behergish. You see, the word nullification conjures up all kinds of negative feelings. Because why? Because we are sustained by not being nullified. For them, nullification is not a negative, because it's not nullification as in annihilation. It's as being like fish in the sea. This is what we want. It's our sustenance. There's some people who are sustained by being invisible, and some people are sustained by being visible. Since their whole metziyus is ayin, since their whole metziyus is bittul, that's why their metziyus is by sensing their source. They thrive on that. That's what makes them be. And look what we learned earlier, chapter 281. And F is built techa. Now we go to the higher level. The F is built techa. That F is not only ayin, F is, which is complete nothing. Hu shagam imcha, even with you, Lo yeshum davar metziyus klal. Even with you, there's no substance, there's no entity at all. At all. That means that they're not even a metziyus. They're not a metziyus at all. They're not even in themselves. They don't feel themselves a metziyus. Remember, Reisha de lo yada. Talked about the level lo yada. There's not even awareness. As we discussed earlier, Sham, that's page chapter 281. Right. Okay. So, behind Hashem is metziyus m'klal. Yeah, well, and that's the level we talked before about the Melech, that is merumen ba'atzmei, that he's so exalted, snasus atzmei, that he's so beyond it all, shalei shum metziyus klal, where there's no existence at all. He gives nothing value. Nothing has any type of has any type of space. And that's the true das elyon. That's really the way the true awareness is. Why did you say amitis das elyon? Because like in the previous chapter, there's amitis de elyon the way it really is, and then there's das elyon where you exist, but your existence is only because of your source, and that's your sustenance, and it's because your source is giving you space. Now that finishes the parentheses. The nimtza. So from all this we know, we find from this, we know from all of this that the energy is in general bittul metziyus, not bittul hayesh, like in Beriyah, like in Evroim. It's bittul metziyus. The metziyus doesn't exist. The kula kamei chaloshav, because everything compared to him is nothing. But with him he exists. So let's do the Keter. The summary is that you cannot compare the awareness, the perception of Atzilus to the perception of the creatures. Because by the creatures, by Nivroim, the das of the Nivroim, of the beings, is only awareness, is only a perception of knowing that it's there. Because their creation is in an infinite distance, not closeness. Even though Atzilus is also yesh ma'ayin, like he said, has el derech moshel meivin dover metech dover. It's like the example of understanding one idea derived from another. The new idea is a new one. It's new. It's not like the details within the general principle. But it's also not like an example, where there the seichel is a different personality. So it's from the same personality, but not like the details. It's from the original personality, but it's not completely foreign. Not like an example. The new seichel has a shaykhus, has a relationship to the original idea. And it's encompassed in there, but very concealed. And that's why the perception of Atzilus, being that's made in Medover, Meter Dover, mehus, because it's part of the original mehus of the divine. So it's not just it knows as an idea. Like the Moshel knows that has an idea that's being an example for. In Beriyah, the Mosach of Beriyah, Pasha. Atzilus is an idea that came from an idea that was there. It's not a foreign substance, like a foreign example, like a moshel. And therefore, it's Atzmus, it knows the mehus ha'ayin of the ayin, va'bitlu de kala chashuv. And its bittul, therefore, is commensurate with that knowledge. That's completely nullified. But since it's in its source, we're there, the source, it is tefis mokim, it does have value. Not because it has value of its own. It's only because Ein Sof gave it mokim. V'hu in ein zulasecha. This is ein zulasecha. Shema im atzmus yesh metziyus. That with atzmus there is an existence. V'metziyus ubchinas ayin. And what's the metziyus? Therefore, it's ayin. It's bittul. So because it's aware, so it's a seichel chadash. It's a new seichel, but it's aware that its whole being comes from the original seichel. It doesn't have its own existence. But the ultimate Asalian, the true higher perspective, Shagam ima Atzmus efes bilade. That even with Atzmus, nothing there without him. So there's nothing. That would be in the level of Keter. So this concludes chapter 293. Okay. And we'll stop here.